Hello everyone, I'm Helen Irlen, and I'm glad you joined me today to attend the webinar on helpful tips and practical strategies for children struggling in school. I feel like I should not have put children and I should have put students instead, because for some reason we always think about children in terms of elementary school, whereas some of the tips and strategies are going to be for even older children, those in high school and even college. Before we start, I want to do, what we call housekeeping first, and to talk to you about Building Strength webinars and to thank Dr. David for hosting this webinar, and to let you know that you can go to buildingstrengthwebinars.com and pick up a lot of other very interesting webinars. Matter of fact, one of the things that I've been doing is that I've been kind of giving myself a gift and going once a week on to Building Strength webinars and picking one to listen to. This week I went to osteoporosis, which is very, I think, relevant for me and many of you there, and found out a lot of information, good information, about what we should do, what we shouldn't do, what the myths that are out there, and I'm making some changes based on the information that I heard on the webinar. So there's a lot of different webinars presented by a lot of different professionals, and so you can have a lot of different information. Let me also let you know that at any time you want more in the future, you would like more information about the Irlen Method, you can go to www.irlen.com. And what we have is on the website is, first of all, there is a bar so that you can click and change the background color and try reading with different colors. In addition, we have a lot of information in terms of the different populations that the Irlen Method helps, including those with reading problems, including those who may be misdiagnosed as ADD or ADHD, including those with headaches and migraines, TBI, concussions, medical conditions, visual conditions, and also those on the autism spectrum, because it's different for everyone, and therefore we have many different self-tests that you can take. So it's an interesting website to just get on and browse through. I'm also saying YouTube is fun, to go into YouTube and type in Irlen and see which videos pop up and maybe enjoy some of the videos. But today is different. Today we're looking at those academic areas that that affect attention and learning, that seem to not be remediable. So they're really problematic for the student in school. But before we start the webinar, I would like to give you just a little bit of background about myself. My name is Helen Irlen, and my area of expertise is visual perceptual processing, except for the fact I have a strong research background. I'm also a school psychologist. I am also an adult learning disability specialist. I'm also licensed as a therapist. I have spent many years working with both children and adults who have learning problems. And it's some of that information that I want to share with you today. Because we really need to take a look at what we can do for those students for whom they have learning problems that is affecting their ability to perform adequately in school. It's affecting grades, it's affecting what they think about themselves, and there is no immediate solution, and remediation and practice and instruction doesn't seem to be making a significant difference. Interestingly enough, one of the things that I did in my past life was when I started and was director of the Adult Learning Disability Program at a local university in California. And this is going back to 1980 when we were first recognizing the fact that adults have learning problems and had reading problems that didn't go away. They just went away. They left the educational system. But in the 1980s, we started programs for adults, knowing that, yes, they may be struggling and they may have difficulties, but they do deserve to be in a university and stay in a university. So the program that I had at the university, we were working with those adults who were 18 years of age and older, looking at the fact that they were bright enough to make it to a 4-year university, but yet they were still struggling. And the program that I started had a number of different aspects to it, one of which was a research component, because we wanted to look at what were the questions that we weren't asking to identify other underlying causes that can be holding a student back. We also had a counseling component, because if you have struggled in school, you're very aware of the fact that others can do things better and easier than you can. And no matter how much people say to you, don't worry about it, you're fine, you're okay, you know you're not. And it leaves you as an adult with feelings of being dumb, stupid, lazy, or bad because you just aren't living up to the expectations of your parents or the teachers. And we needed to address those issues with the adults because you can't make changes unless they can accept those changes and believe in themselves so that they'll be able to utilize the changes. The final part of the program was we thought was going to be remediation and instruction. We were going to teach them the skills that they didn't have. And what we found out is the fact that it doesn't matter whether you have a skill or not, because if you don't have a skill, a strategy works just as well. But if you don't have a strategy, then you're really in trouble. So we ended up working with strategies, whether we call them tips, whether we call them accommodations today, or strategies. They're critical and essential if you can't develop the skills. And that's what I want to talk about today, is picking up specific areas. We're not going to get to all the areas today, and this is going to be part one, and we'll continue with some of the other academic areas in part two. So I'm going to start out talking about listening and attending today. Probably with part two we're going to get to spelling and math, and maybe penmanship and reading will be in part two or part three. Just depends how long it takes and how many strategies we're going to be talking about. Strategies are important. It was amazing to me in 1980 that the school system was looking at addressing issues with children only in terms of instruction and repetition, and not integrating for them the concept of strategies or accommodations. I was thrilled to finally see that we now have a tiered program set up for students called 504s, where they are recognizing the fact that a child can stay in regular classrooms and may not need to be in special education as long as they have appropriate accommodations. So this is recognized at a federal level and should be implemented in the schools. So any of the suggestions that I'm making today should be able to be integrated into the classroom for your students. First thing that I want to mention is the fact that all learning is brain-based, and the fact that everybody's brain is different. And this is really an important concept, this concept that one size doesn't fit all. We don't all wear the same dress size, we don't all have the same shoe size, and we need to therefore provide individual differences in what we wear, what we do, and it's the same way with accommodations and strategies. Very important concept, that you can't force a strategy on the individual. The individual has to be able to utilize that strategy because it fits their learning style. And everyone is different. So I'm going to present a number of hints and strategies, but you need to try them out. You need to find out what works. This is very important because what I see a lot is the fact that the strategies that are being recommended today, and they go on sometimes for pages. I mean, I read psychoeducational evaluations on many of the children who come to see me at the Institute. And many of them, the strategies are designed by people who do not have any problems in school. And I don't see them as particularly useful for those who are struggling. The strategies that I am going to be talking about are strategies that those who have had difficulties themselves have created and have said have been successful. So over the last 25 years of working with children and adults who've been struggling, I've been collecting the strategies and the hints and accommodations, whatever we want to call them, that have worked, that have been useful. And again, you have to present a wide variety to find out what's going to work for each individual. And that's going to be different depending on the individual. So we got to find the ones that's suited to the individual. And sometimes the only way you can do that is by just trying them. And if you try them and it doesn't work, it's not the child's fault, it's the strategy. It's the strategy that is inappropriate for the individual. The other issue for me is the fact that I don't want the strategy to be crutch. It has to be something that the individual can use for a lifetime. Let me give you an example of that. Years ago, some of you may remember back when we didn't have calculators, that engineers used slide rulers that were like yardsticks. They were very long and you had to put them out on a whole desk, and that's how they did their calculation. Slide rulers are crutch, whereas today we can do calculations very easily on computers. Computers come in different sizes. They can be very small. You can carry them with you. You can go into the grocery store. You can quickly use them to calculate things, so that a calculator becomes a strategy, whereas the slide rule was a crutch. So anything I mention, I think about in terms of, is this a strategy or a crutch? Let me give you another example. Sometimes when a child is having difficulty counting, you'll have teachers that will teach them to put the number down and then put the dots, the number of dots, and then count the number of dots. What happens when the child doesn't have a piece of paper and needs to count if they can't memorize their math facts? That to me is a crutch. Whereas I don't see any problem when you have to add, and you can use your fingers to add because your fingers are always with you. So using your fingers becomes a strategy, and doing little dots and counting dots become a crutch. Any of the recommendations that I'm going to make also should not require the teachers to do anything different. I don't want to require the teacher to change her her teaching style, because she's not going to be able to do it. And yet, I see that quite often. I pull up reports and I see them saying things in terms of recommendations: provide a structured environment and a structured teaching style. And I think, what does that mean? And how is the teacher going to accommodate and provide that when she has 30 students in her classroom? She's going to do what she normally does. Do expressive language strategies to get the information in. Make sure that you are always motivating the child to use the child's most efforts. Use metacognitive techniques. I'm sitting here thinking, I don't think that that's going to particularly work. So none of these strategies are going to be saying to the teacher, you need to do something different. You need to, none of them are going to say that. A lot of times I read things like, teacher, make sure that you say things, say the same information a number of times because the child doesn't get it if you say it just once. Or you must talk and not use a lot of language. You have to reduce the language you use in terms of explaining things. Again, that's just not going to happen. And those of you who are teachers out there are probably saying, thank you for saying that, Helen. We don't want to be able to change. We don't want someone to come at us and tell us we have to do things differently. We have enough problem with just having 30, 35 students in our classroom, getting the information out, and dealing with all the issues that we have to deal with. In addition, I don't want the recommendations to require the teacher to do anything extra so that it takes additional teacher time. That's just not going to happen, and therefore none of these strategies we're going to require that the teacher has to do anything extra in order for the child to be able to, or student be able to be more successful. And finally, today, it's really important that the recommendations are cost effective. This is just a priority today. We can't expect things to be very expensive, and for the school to implement them or for you to implement them. They should be simple and easy and cost effective. Let's start out by talking about listening and attending, because teachers present information orally, and this is how we learn. We learn from listening to the teacher. So we have to be able to listen and be able to retain the information that's being presented. In addition, one of the ways that the teachers know if you're listening and if you understand is they ask questions. And so you need to be able to listen and answer the questions. Note-taking takes listening skills. If you have to work at listening, there is no way then that you can listen and take notes simultaneously. You have a choice. You can choose to either listen or you can take notes, but you can't do the two things together. And finally, students who are having difficulty listening can often be daydreaming, restless, look like they're inattentive, and get misdiagnosed. And the last thing we want to do is have a child misdiagnosed and put on medication that's inappropriate. Before we even get into the concept of hints or practical tools, look at the fact that we have different listening and listening styles. And yet, we don't always recognize that. I think there's a myth that says the only time that you're listening and picking up information is if you're looking at me. And a lot of times teachers expect children to always pay attention and look at them. And there are some students that if they look, they can't pay attention. Let me give you a wonderful example of that. I had a professor who was head of the department at the university level. And the grad students would go in and talk to him about their projects or their thesis. And he would sit there like this while they were talking. And they'd walk out and they'd say to me, he wasn't paying attention at all. He didn't hear anything I said. And I thought to myself, boy, you guys are in trouble, because he actually has perfect auditory recall, so that you can come back to him a month later and he can recite the whole conversation back and forth perfectly. But what was really sad about that is his family also didn't know that his style to listen was to cover his eyes and look down. And that's the way he concentrated when he really wanted to attend. And I mentioned that to his adult children. And they looked at me and they said, oh, they said, you know, we would have piano concerts and musical concerts, and Dad would come and he'd always sit there like this. And we thought that he was embarrassed or ashamed of us, or that he wasn't paying attention. So it's really sad sometimes when our nonverbal behavior is misinterpreted and people are totally not understanding. So let's talk about some of the other listening styles. One is look away, and that's one I was kind of showing you, that there are students who pick up information not when they're looking at you, but when they're looking down or looking away. And that we have to recognize for the students that this is their way of learning, and you can tell. Do you ever watch a student and they're just not paying, you think they're not paying attention, and you're talking and you stop and you ask them a question and they've heard every single thing that you have said to them. There are other students who need to draw or to doodle. I was working with a family today, and when I mentioned that their child draws and that's how he listens, Mom said, oh, I did the same thing when I was in college. I would sit there and doodle, and that's what kept me attending in class. So drawing and doodling for some individuals keeps you in focus and attending. In my office, I have a basket, large or not, I'm not sure, but all kinds of different manipulatives that you can squeeze and you can stretch and you can do things with. And that basket sits there. And it's interesting that I can go days when neither the parent nor the child will go and take anything out of the basket. Whereas there are always some children or even adults who the first thing they do is they reach and find something that tactily is appealing to them, and they don't let go of it. And when you have a child that needs to have this type of tactile stimulation in order to attend and pay attention, again, you can't select what they need. They need to be able to say to you, oh, I like this. This is good. This feels good. Obviously, you're not going to use balls that they can throw around. The smaller, the better. They need to know that they need to kind of keep it private. So that the teacher needs to be aware of it, so she's not going to take it away from them. Some children just use a pen like this, and they just keep the pen in their hand down by their lap, and they're just holding it and rolling it back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. So I want you to be aware of those students who have a different learning style from looking at you, and to teach them that this is their style and give them permission to use this style. Here's a good one. Here's another one in terms of learning styles. Let me teach you as an adult how you can quickly identify your learning style for gaining information. Say you're driving and you get lost and you pull into the nearest gas station and you ask for directions. And they say to you, now go 4 blocks, turn right, go 3 blocks, turn left, and they do it all verbally for you. Or they say, get on in California, so you're going to get on the 405, and then you're going to get off at this exit, and then you're going to go down this street. But you're getting all the information verbally. And how many of you at that point just kind of go, and you smile, and you drive off, and you're just as lost and confused as when you had asked for the information. So you go to another gas station, and hopefully they're going to give you the information in a different way. Because some people do like verbal, and you can just say it to them. Here's the directions, and they can track it, process it, keep it, and follow through. There are other individuals, like myself, who need to see it and a map drawn out. And I need to see a map or a visual diagram or even a picture. And that's the easiest way for me to pick up or retain the information. So what I will say to people is, don't tell me the directions. Let's draw a simple map for me so that I can see it and I can follow it. There are other people who need things done in pictures or in diagrams. What's important is to know your style. It's a little bit harder. You can't quite ask a child, when you get lost, how do you want your directions? But I'm sure all of you as an adult know how you want your directions. But what you can do is watch the child and try different ways of presenting the information and see which way they have the easiest time in terms of then retaining the information and understanding the information. In addition to finding out the styles and giving the child permission to use these styles, and teaching the child to ask for the information when they want it repeated. The last thing, let me go through that. That's an interesting concept here, is when a child doesn't understand the information and asks the teacher for help, what's going to happen is that the teacher is going to repeat it exactly the same way that they did it the first time. And if that doesn't work for the child, then they're no farther ahead than when I went to the gas station when I got my instructions verbally. They're just as lost. So sometimes that information needs to be repeated in different ways with different styles. And one of the easiest ways for a teacher to try to do that is to have another student explain the information to the child. Usually children explain things in a very different way. And it's a win-win situation because the student who is explaining the information gets it reinforced. So they're reinforcing their learning. The teacher's not taking any of her additional teacher time to do it. And the child now is hearing it in a very different way that makes sense to them. And sometimes they have an easier time saying to another child or another student, I don't understand that. Can you try it again for me? Seating can make a difference in terms of being able to listen and attend. There are some students who really are bothered by ambient noise and background noise. And the last thing you want to do is have them sit near a window because when the gardeners go by and if there's cars going by or noise or playground noise, they're going to have a very hard time filtering out that background noise and attending to the teacher. You don't want the child who has difficulty filtering noise sitting next to an open door for the same reason. As people walk by the corridor, they're going to be talking, all of which is going to be distracting, and the child's going to have much more difficulty picking up the information. Years ago, and I don't know if they still do it, there was this concept of the open classroom, and where they have a building, one building, and they had no walls between the different classrooms. So you can be, one teacher could be sitting in one corner of the building teaching, and you can hear the students and the teachers all in the other areas because there was no walls and there was no doors. And I'm very glad that that concept, I hope, is not still around because it makes it very, very difficult for certain children to learn in that type of an environment. For children who cannot pick up the information, sometimes they need to just capture it so that they can pick it up and re-listen to it and re-listen to it again, rather than having someone keep re-explaining things over and over again. So there's various ways of doing that, and one way is to use an old-fashioned tape recorder. But if you're going to use a tape recorder, let me tell you some things that are very important. One is you need to use a tape recorder that has variable speed. This way, when you play it back, you can play it back twice as fast. The person may sound like Donald Duck, but they can still hear it and understand it easily, and they can re-listen to the information in half the time. You also want a tape recorder that has a counter on it, so that as the students can take notes and hear key concepts and just write down key concepts and then write down the number that is on the counter. So elephants are at 300 and lions are at 400 and zebras are at 450. And they basically have written down basic headings and keywords underneath it. They look at their outline and go, I remember everything about elephants, but I don't remember what was said about zebras. Oh, that's at 450, and they quickly can then move the tape to 450 and listen to it, so they can get in and get out quickly and pick up the information they need without re-listening to the whole lecture. And I use this a lot with college students who find this a very effective way of getting the information. Teachers in high school are not as amenable to having somebody tape them. Even in college they may not like it, and I always say that to the students, just tell them that they can have the tape back after they've listened to it, or at the end of the school term, so that they have control over the tape. We talked about other children reviewing the information so that it's a win-win. Some children, no matter how many times they hear it, that's not their style. They need to see it. So for students who are in high school and college, you're taking notes. And one of the things that I find is not effective is for the teacher or to be required to provide the notes to the student. That's taking additional teacher time. What I do find effective is sharing of notes, so that the child finds someone in the classroom who takes really good notes, they can read their writing, and then they ask them if they can share their notes with them. You know, it's getting dark and I'm going to turn on a light, so I'll be right back. Don't go away. Okay, sorry about that. It's just that the light changed significantly. I do have a very good friend who's a medical doctor, and I saw him recently and I needed him to take some information down, and I said to him, just write it down. And he looked at me and he said, I don't write. And I said, wait a minute. You went to an Ivy League school with me, you went to medical school. Are you telling me that you never took notes? And he said, nope, can't take notes, I never took notes. He said, I always found somebody, for him it was usually girls, and even in medical school, who would be willing to share their notes with me. And he successfully made it through his whole educational career, never taking a note, because he couldn't. And it's much better to say, hey, I'm not going to do it, I'm going to find somebody can, and let me just copy your notes down, or I'll give you papers, so that 3R papers, so when you take notes you're also making a copy for me. There's lots of things that you can do today. Here's a fun one. This is called gathering the sound, because for a lot of people, when you listen, the sound's just not coming in clear enough. It kind of sounds mumbled, so you miss bits and pieces of what's being said. So here's a funny strategy. Watch me for a minute, okay? See how I'm cupping my hands like this? Now I'm going to put them behind my ears and move my ears slightly forward so that I'm gathering the sound. I sound louder when I do it, and you also sound louder. And it's an easy way to bring in the sound so you're using less effort. People sound much more distinct. They're not mumbled. So if you don't look strange, you sit in front, and you can even put one hand down so that you can take notes and write. And all the students and children behind you really think that you're just doing this. They have no idea that you're sitting here and gathering the sound. And it's a very effective way of being able to make things louder and clearer and easier to hear and easier to retain. There's a lot of high-tech software out there, and I didn't mention all of them because by the time you listen to this, I'm sure there's going to be a lot more available, and things are changing so rapidly. You have speak and write software available. You have Dragon Dictation, and you have a free Dragon app that you can download that people are saying are pretty good. You talk, and as you talk, it literally writes it out for you, and then you can take it and upload it onto your computer if you need to. There's something called Echo Pen or LiveScribe Smart Pen, and what that does, again, it has a microphone, and as you're writing or taking notes, it's picking up the information. Then you can go back and just tap on that section or that word, and it will play it back for you. So I'm just mentioning a few of the various high tech that is out there today. So I'm going to remind you again, the last thing you want to do is ask a teacher to change their style, to change their language patterns, to do something special for a student, to have to repeat themselves over and over again for the student. It's just not going to happen, and you're going to go get frustrated. So you need to look at ways that that individual can help themselves to be able to acquire the information. I'd be remiss, considering my area of expertise is perceptual processing, not to mention the fact that Irlen syndrome and lighting can affect listening and having a significant effect on listening. Gee, you say, how does looking affect listening? Well, those of you who wear prescription lenses, and if it's a strong prescription, you know what happens when you take your glasses off. You kind of go, I don't hear you. I need to put my glasses back on so that I can hear you. So there is a connection between hearing and listening. There's a very strong connection. If I have Irlen syndrome and I'm looking at you, things may start to move around you in the environment and change and flash or pulsate. And you keep being drawn to those things that are happening in the environment, and that's going to affect or impede, again, your listening. The person who is talking may not be crystal clear, may be going in and out of focus, and you lose details. You lose lip cues, you lose body language, you lose facial expressions, which adds a lot of information to what you're hearing. In addition, let's talk about another interesting connection. Many of you, or some of you, wear sunglasses outside. So my question is, why do you wear sunglasses outside? If you really are always wearing sunglasses outside, and I can always tell the people who come in and their sunglasses are where? They're right on top of their head. So I know that the minute that they walk outside, they're going to take off their sunglasses they have to put their sunglasses on. So it's not an issue of cosmetics or looking cool. It's a necessity. And you wear your sunglasses outside because otherwise you would have some type of physical symptom. For some people, their eyes get watery, others they get strained, some they get tired, they may get sleepy after a while in the sunlight. For others, it gives them a headache, some people nauseous or dizzy, others anxiety, irritability. And you may not have just one of those symptoms if you pay attention, but you may have a few of those symptoms. What you don't know is the fact that the brain interprets and is triggered by fluorescent lights and bright lights exactly the same way as sunlight. It's because it builds slower. It's not a quick trigger that you're probably less aware of it. So you have students sitting in class under the fluorescent lighting and starting to feel fidgety, irritable, hard time concentrating. You have other students who, as they sit under the fluorescent light, start to get tired and drowsy. They put their head down on the desk. They start daydreaming. You have other students who are getting a headache, even migraines, sitting in class under the lights. With any of the physical symptoms that I mentioned, it affects their ability to listen and retain information. And for some students, you have the fact that they have both physical symptoms and they have distortions going on, and they rather not be there. I've had some students who, because it was so bad, they had headaches, nauseous, and dizzy, all they wanted to do was get out of class and get out of school. They were constantly going to the nurse's office. Even at a young age, they were running away from school. They had one adult who told me he started running away from school in kindergarten. He didn't know why. What's important to know is the fact that often children who have physical symptoms, as they sit in class just under the lighting or when reading, and they go to the nurse's office and then they're checked out, and medically and visually there is no reason for their headaches or other physical symptoms, we start to think that they're creating the symptoms to get out of doing schoolwork or to get out of school. Often then they stop reporting because people stop believing them. So just because your child may have told you in, I don't know, 3rd or 4th grade that they had headaches and now they're in middle school and they're not reporting them anymore, doesn't mean that they're not still getting headaches. In addition, I can't tell you how many times when I ask children what happens and how do they feel by the end of the school day, and they say they have a headache. Or when I say what happens when you're reading at school under the fluorescent lights and they say they have a headache, the parent looks and says, "Well, you never told me that." And the child comes back and says, "But you never asked me." So hopefully that will stick somewhere in the back of your mind, and that you'll learn to ask. Because if you don't ask, you don't know. And so the way you ask your question is, how do you feel by the end of the school day? Do your eyes bother you? Does your head bother you? Does your stomach bother you? Because any of these factors are going to affect their ability to listen, attend, and pick up information. In addition, behaviors may be misinterpreted. Again, if they're fidgety, if they're looking away, if they're daydreaming, if they're not retaining information, they can get mislabeled, and there can be many different labels, including ADD, and then some other more significant ones in terms of behavioral issues and behavior control issues. And the child is being then placed on medication inappropriately. And you and I both know that the last thing we want is to have a child unnecessarily on medication, that's just not good for the child. What we're going to do is, in part 2 of the next seminar on helpful hints and practical strategies, we're going to get into spelling and those students who have problems spelling. And I always think the world is kind of broken up in half. You have those who are natural spellers and just used to do really well on spelling bees, and those who are like me and who are not natural spellers. And then you have those who spell phonetically. But we're going to talk about what we can do to help them learn how to spell, and what happens if to learn their spelling, and what happens if they really have difficulty spelling. It's going to affect a lot of areas academically, and what we can do. We're going to talk about math and students who have difficulty memorizing numbers, students who have difficulty understanding, retaining concepts, or understanding the steps that they have to use. We're going to talk about those students who, no matter what we do, they really can't access material by reading, and their reading comprehension stays weak, and so that's what we're going to talk about in future seminars. Before we go, I do want to bring up one more slide for you, and that's to remind you of the resources that are available for you. First of all, Irlen.com has a lot of information. It also lets you change the background color, as I mentioned before. Some of you who know about Irlen, and let me welcome those of you who are screeners and who are listening to this, and thank you for joining us. And for my parents and clients, you know about how important it is to change the background color for some individuals. For those of you who don't know anything about it, you'll have fun getting on the website and trying different things. If you're out there and you're a professional and you're interested in knowing more and wanting to become an Irlen screener, you can find that out on the website. And also, we can look at different test centers that are in the U.S. and around the world, because we have test centers in 54 countries. I've written 2 books, one called Reading by the Colors, and the second one is The Irlen Revolution, a guide to changing your perception and your life. In the Irlen Revolution, in the appendix, I have talked about these academic areas and given you helpful hints in terms, I'm going to try to discuss many of them here in the webinars, but there is also a lot more information and helpful hints and strategies that you can use in the appendix for the Irlen Revolution. So if this is an area that's of interest to you, let me suggest that you look into purchasing the Irlen Revolution. You can get it from my store, but it's a lot cheaper to just go on to Amazon.com and purchase it that way. I want to thank you for joining us today. I want to remind you about all the other wonderful webinars that are available to you through buildingstrengthwebinars.com. And please take advantage of those, and hopefully I will see you next time. Thank you for joining me today.